Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen W. Long, and this is The Writing Life. And this is The Writing Life with a twist this time, because I'm going to be the guest, and my friend Linda Philippi is the guest host. So welcome, Linda. Little kind of a deja vu thing.
A little bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for showing up. You're the pro, and so I'm just going to turn this over to you.
Okay, well, Steve, I'm honored, for
Okay.
one, to be asked to interview you about the new book that you're working on.
Yes.
And I'm even more honored that I've had the opportunity to read it.
Oh, good.
Because you sent it to me in the, the sort of the unfinished or unpublished
Sure,
format.
sure.
And I love it.
Oh, thank you so much.
I couldn't stop reading, and when I got to the end, I realized I'm sitting there with tears streaming down my face.
My goodness.
I really, really connected with those characters. I absolutely love it, and I think
Well, we can stop now, because that's perfect.
it's going to be an
Yeah.
amazing success. Anyway, so let's talk a little
Yeah,
bit about
thank
that
you. Okay.
for you and your process.
Yeah. Well, I guess I gravitate toward character.
Mm-hmm.
And so by definition, that's mainstream literary, which you can't say it's a genre because that puts it outside of genre fiction. Genre fiction would be a mystery or a romance or something like that. So mainstream literary is its own thing. And that's defined by an emphasis on character and language. And that's what attracts me. So that's what I like to write. This particular book, honestly, the inspiration for that was the Willie Nelson song, "Mamas Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys."
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why. I was listening to that and I thought it capsulized the American hero. And I mean, if you go back to Huckleberry Finn or Come Up to the Fonz, and anything in between, these are people who stand a little bit outside, and they don't always conform. They're a little unconventional, but they have a good heart. And I just thought, what a great start, what a great basis for a story. And then I had to find the story. But for me, it starts with character, and that was it.
So did Owen come to you in the night, or how did that develop exactly?
You know, well, actually, Owen came from this book, which is my first book.
Oh, right, of
Yeah.
course.
And he is a minor character, but I just had an affinity for him. Having said that he's archetypal, I also have known people sort of like that, a little bit gruff, self-assured, maybe not strictly moral all the time. And so that's that. And so Owen, as I developed him, is an amalgam of people I knew, but fill in the blanks.
Now let's talk about the way you say his name. Where did his last name come from?
So it's Owen Yoniakut. And in one of my many, many writing classes, a teacher said that particularly your protagonist, the protagonist's name should mean something to you and should remind you, the author, of the character. And I picture Owen as sort of squat. And so when you say Owen, you know, you're making your mouth is round, and I thought of that. And the other thing is his last name. For a very short time, I sold motorcycles on commission, which was a very interesting job. And one of my customers one time, his name was Yoniakut. And I was chatting with him, and I said, "Gee, that's interesting. Is that Eastern European?" And no, it's Apache.
Oh.
And it means gray bear.
Interesting.
And so that fit right in with my look, the way Owen looks. I think he's burly, he's sort of bearish, and so every time I wrote that, it reminded me who he was.
Okay, that's it. That's good. Yeah. I was wondering how you came with that name, and then of course his brother Ernie.
Ernie, yeah,
Right.
Yeah, that's right. And as you know, because you read it, There's a little bit of backstory about his mother, and I have one of the characters, I'm not sure if it's her or her friend, when she meets Owen's father, and he says Yoniakut, somebody asks, is that Eastern European? And he makes the slightest reference to, no, a lot closer to home.
Right, and wasn't there something too about, oh, that war was over a long time ago?
That's right.
And so then I thought, well, yeah, I couldn't quite piece it together, but when you say
Now you know.
Native
yeah.
American, okay.
Yeah. Because the backstory takes place in the midst of World War II. That's his mother. Yeah.
Right, and I love Martha. And I love the way they refer to her as Martha. They don't call her mom.
No, and you know, I tried to show her growth from really a dependent woman, dependent on her parents. She left that environment and married without their approval, and then, spoiler alert, her husband dies, and she has to change. She has to be strong. And I tried to make her dialogue different, her speech pattern, where she was more, you know, Roscoe, and they were kind of, they worked together. When she became the head of the ranch, she speaks differently, she treats him differently, and that was all very conscious. One of the things, if somebody got picky, Owen doesn't speak like them at all. And somebody might say, well, where did he get his dialect? And he just, I liked it, so that's what I did.
Well, also, he hadn't been there in a long time.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
You know, he kind of deliberately went away after the whole dramatic episode.
That's right.
Oh, that would be a spoiler alert.
That would be a spoiler.
Okay,
yeah.
we won't talk about
Yeah.
that. But let's suffice it to say there's always a woman involved.
Yeah,
Right?
and sometimes more.
More than one, exactly.
Yeah. So that's how that came about. Again, I've known truck drivers. That was, for a while, my profession, and then I was associated. We owned a business, and we had our own delivery truck. So
Do you have a background in ranching at all?
you know, that was interesting. I absolutely do not. And if you take writing classes, they say write what you know, and I didn't have a clue. So what I did was a couple of things. My wife Kathy and I went to that area and just looked at the terrain, just to get a feel for what would this be like. And so the description has some accuracy. More than that, I interviewed and worked a little bit with a large animal vet.
Oh, okay.
And it was eye-opening. And what struck me, one of the primary things that struck me was the animals are a commodity. And I thought, you know, you could be selling rolls of carpet. And so my one experience, I was giving shots to the calves. And there's a feeder, and they stick their heads through the restraint, and then when their head is through, the restraint closes and they can't get out. So I would walk along and reach over, and I'm giving them shots in their neck area. One of the calves protested, resisted that, and he jumped and shook the whole line of restraints and so on. And the vet was way down the line, and he looked at me and he said, "Are you all right?" And I said, "I'm fine, but I was afraid I was going to break the needle off in his neck." And he said, "We got more needles."
Wow.
And I thought, boy, does that say something? So anyway, I try to do some homework on that, and I think we can say this. There's a part where he has to take care of a fawn.
Right.
And so I wrote the scene, and then I took it to the vet, and I said, "Is this possible?" And he said, "You have to move quickly, but it is. You can do that."
Okay.
So that was my research.
Well, and I thought that, I mean, really, you know, the story kind of opens with a bang, so to speak.
It does, yeah.
And I love that, because I remember something that I've heard in writing classes is people always think that you have to have this long preamble. And it's really, okay, write all that if you want to, and then actually begin your story, at an action
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
So people don't get bored with there was a dark and stormy night.
Exactly. I've taken lots of classes, been to lots of seminars, and there was an author, I think his name is pronounced Lesquat.
Okay.
It looks like Lescoart, but I believe it's John Lesquat. And I remember him saying, put your character on the page and make him do something, which is the opposite of this long, and I love some of that poetic opening, and I think sometimes a great notion opens with a long, and of course Michener,
Well, he had the luxury of 10,000
yeah,
pages.
first the earth cooled, and then, but
And the lava started rising
that's
up.
right. But, and I, I'm a newish writer, this is my second book, and I just didn't want to lose the reader.
And tastes have changed too. I don't know that
Sure.
Michener could be Michener today with his,
I think his first novel was The Bridge at Toko-Ri, and I went to get that to educate myself. And in my opinion, it was awful. And clearly, you can get better. He wrote and wrote and wrote, and I thought his work was fascinating later on, but the early stuff, I didn't care for.
well, see, it just goes to show, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and you hope you do. You hope you do get better. I think what you see sometimes is an author will have some success, so it's the opposite. Yeah, it was really, they work real hard, and it's a good work, and then they phone it in.
There are a number of writers, and I'm not going to mention any names, but they're all well known.
Sure.
And I can read the first one, and by the time you're midway through the second one, oh, it's the formulaic aspect of it
Yeah.
that it's almost intolerable to me. I just can't do it, and I think, okay, so you had the one thought,
Right.
and now you're going to just keep dancing that same dance, singing that same song, and I don't find that interesting. That's one of the things I love about this, is I like the way that it kind of bounces back and forth, but not in a way where you feel like you're not following the story. You're following the story very well, and I think there are some writers who do that
Yeah.
really well, and I think you're one of them.
Well, thank you. And when you watch television, or go back farther, the word cliffhanger
Right.
was literally, on a Saturday matinee, they would leave somebody, Polly Pureheart would be hanging on the cliff, and then you'd have to come back next week. And so, to some extent, I think things I read and I hope when I write, that you have to keep the reader moving forward. My primary writing teacher said, it's the dramatic question. You always have to pose a dramatic question, or maybe several, before you answer it. Because when you answer it, there's no reason to keep reading. So you ask the question and move on, or pose the question, and then maybe you pose another question and then answer the first question. But that's what draws the reader through.
The hopscotching effect.
Yeah, yeah, and it is literally what's going to happen.
Well, it's interesting to me too, thinking about this. When you said cliffhanger, it made me flash on this because I started binge watching something on Netflix.
Sure.
Last night. Didn't get to bed till 1.
Uh-oh.
I watched 2 extra episodes because it was that cliffhanger, and I thought, ooh, just one more. Ooh, just one
Yeah,
more. Okay,
yeah.
now I got to go to bed. But I think, we have sort of changed and evolved as consumers of entertainment, whether it's the written word
Right.
or visually or whatever it's going to be.
Sure.
So we do, and shorter attention spans, I think, have been proven scientifically or
Yeah.
something. So the idea that you're going to keep people guessing and moving along with your characters, especially in something like this where, it's not a gigantic action shoot 'em up. It's definitely character driven,
Right.
and it's their narrative arc that's the whole point of the story, how they evolve.
Yes, thank you. Somebody asked me one time, why, and it was in this book particularly, why do they have to start out bad? Well, if there isn't a flaw to repair, then there's nothing to learn. And really then there is no character arc, which you can do, but that's a different kind of book.
Everybody, it's the shot at redemption, right?
It is. And I think to learn something. And I'll tell you, one of the greatest compliments I got on this book, a fella came up to me and he was literally shaking. He was so angry. And he said, I have never hated a protagonist like I hate your guy. And I thought, fabulous.
Good.
Because, and I've always said, these are black marks on white paper. That's not real. It's not a photograph. It's not a statue. How do you absorb this, the ambiguity? You have to be able to read, but to translate, and you don't hear it, so you're taking all this in and making something out of it. And then to evoke an emotion like that, whether you love them or hate them or whatever, I think I did my job.
I think that you're right.
Yeah.
And that how a person, the degree to which they feel, love or hate or, whatever it's going to be, it's all about the lens to which they're filtering
Oh, well.
what they're reading. It's how, like for example, if a person has, father issues or something,
Right.
they're
right.
going to feel differently about a character than if their relationship with their dad was just fine.
Right.
So,
And in fact, I was asked, somebody who read this one, did I have a difficult relationship with my father? And I didn't. That's why it's called fiction.
right.
And not a memoir. But anyway, that was
But you've said it
complimentary.
in enough bars, listened to enough drunks tell their stories.
Well, sure. Yeah, and
know.
well, that's the other thing. Again, one of my teachers said, you don't have to kill somebody to write a murder mystery.
It's true.
You can extrapolate. You can observe things. Maybe there was something, this would be different, but maybe your puppy died. Well, that's not your spouse, but you know what you felt. How do you amplify that emotion? It doesn't have to be the exact thing. And so in this case, it doesn't have to be that I had a difficult relationship with my father. As now you know, that happens in the second book also. So maybe it's deeper than I realized.
I think, honestly, I think that that's a pretty common thing. I
It
mean, I
is.
think about my father and the relationship he had with his father, and so many men that I've known who have had difficult relationships with their fathers, and somehow I guess, being a woman, I always just assumed that we were the ones that had all the troubles, and men just sort of skated through, but that's not true at all.
That's not true. And this is a little disclosure. I have two daughters, and I have a different relationship with them than my wife does. And I think part of that is that they're both female. And I think I'm from an era when moms got to stay home more.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was always there and sort of dealt with everything. So by the time I came home, if I had a reaction, it wasn't mundane. It wasn't something that they'd heard and heard and heard. And both my girls have said the worst thing that they feared was if I disapproved. If I said, I'm not proud of what you've done. Oh, that was, I'd rather take a beating.
Really? Yeah.
Right. So, but anyway, there are those human relations, and in the new book particularly, I hope that it comes through what everybody wants. Reconciliation, love, support, something, forgiveness. But they're all restrained. They're all holding back. And maybe it's a fear of going first, exposing yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to, I really don't want to give anything away because it's such a good book. But one of the things I'll tell you that caught me, that kind of struck me,
Yeah.
was the fact that Ernie's first wife
Yes.
was sort of disparaging about him in that certain way.
Yeah.
And the second wife seemed just as pleased as punch to be married to him. And I thought, well, he must have watched a video or two along the way.
The first wife, I think it's interesting that she's not a main character. She's
No.
sort of a catalyst, but she does show up later. And what Owen observes from a distance is at that point in her life, these many years later, she seems kind of normal. You know, it's not the firecracker that he remembers. And
Yeah, life in a small town has ground her down, really.
right, well, that may be, or just age. Just, you know, the things that we have to deal with. You have to earn a living. If you have a relationship, maybe there are children, you have to take care of them. They're just things that you have to do that sort of corral most of us anyway.
The other one that I liked was I like Iris. I do like Iris.
I like her too. I wanted to show what she's up against. And, well, I'm just going to have to say this. She recognizes some infidelity. And because of her outlook on the world, she tolerates it because she's always said, at least to herself, that her love was greater than his sin until it gets out. What she can't take is people knowing about it. If she can contain it, that's one thing. But once it's out, then that's the end of it. So, and some of the backstory is in the book, some of it is just in my head, but that's the way that she was raised, that we don't let people see inside. You know, we keep
Never air your dirty laundry.
you keep the drapes drawn, and you know, we can do anything, any situation internally, as long as the facade is that everything's just fine.
You know, I was just reading kind of a memoir, and it was about a woman who'd lost her best friend, another woman, and they'd both been alcoholics. And the woman who passed away had been very public about her alcoholism.
Okay.
And written a book and gone on all the talk shows and been on Oprah, and the whole thing had really, this is a true story.
Yeah.
Had done all this. Whereas the woman writing the book, she older, somewhat older, 10 years, her struggle was very private, and she didn't want to say anything about it to anybody.
Right.
And it took her a long time to even disclose to her new friend that she'd gone through the struggle with alcoholism, and it was
Sure.
for that reason that you just don't talk about those sort of unpleasant things. You keep them to yourself and keep them behind closed doors.
Yeah.
So it's interesting the way people approach the world and what they're willing to tolerate or what their boundaries might be.
I think, you know, if you go out far enough, often our goals are the same, but our approaches are so different. And I think a lot of it is a facade, that we want to show success or purity or whatever it is that is important to us. That's what we want to have the world see. And so now, Facebook as an example. No, but I think that,
you're right.
you know, or the Christmas letter. You know, you get the Christmas letter, and all the kids are fabulous. And, you know, we went on this terrific vacation, and my husband just got a raise, and all of these wonderful things. And so by comparison, you're thinking, gee, you know, my kids struggle, and I didn't get a raise. And so there's that comparison. Because, and I've said this before, I think it was George Bernard Shaw said, it is not enough that one succeed. One's friends must also fail. So, and that's, you know, that's what it is that comparison. How do I rank? Where am I?
You know, and I think it's true that in overall it does put so much pressure on people, and as we see with, you know, little kids being bullied and you know,
yeah, sure.
But the idea is that don't compare your life with somebody else's highlight reel. 'Cause
Exactly.
We can all do the highlight reel.
Sure.
And some people are more inclined to do that than others on social media, because you don't really, not the vague book thing where it's like, oh, it's been a terrible day today.
Right.
Oh, woe is me. And then everybody rushes in to say, oh my God, what's wrong?
Right.
Oh, I could never talk about it.
Yeah.
Well, or you could say nothing
Yeah.
and post tomorrow when you have something pleasant to say.
Right, yeah.
I mean, but you know, there are places and times, and especially, you know, in the books that you've written, this new one in particular, you know, it's such a small town that preserving your privacy,
You bet.
I mean, there really isn't much. And people know what you buy at the grocery store, and they know what medications you're taking, and probably for
Right,
what.
right.
And so without, the banker knows how much money you've got, and
Right.
without preserving some real strong personal boundaries, you feel like you give yourself away with every, every switch in the wind,
Yeah.
and it's hard to hold on to an identity without being. And I think maybe that's what makes people in those kinds of places seem as though they're very taciturn
Yes.
or inward, introverted, and what maybe they're really not. It's just a
It's
self-protection.
the boundaries. Interestingly, you've touched on something, and that is the title.
Right.
So the title of the book is All Hat, and I heard that now decades ago, and I thought it was so intriguing because the whole slogan, the saying is, he's all hat and no cattle. So
yeah.
there's no substance.
Right.
And each of the people that we've talked about have some facade that they're showing, and that's they're just all hat. And they each of them have some merit as well, but it may not be what they're trying to show. So Ernie's a solid guy. He's a good father, and he's a school teacher, and but in his mind that's not enough. He wants to be on the ranch. Owen certainly wants to portray something besides what he really is. And anyway, that's where the title came from.
That's actually when I first heard that. That's kind of what I assumed.
Yeah.
There was part of that saying.
Sure.
But I thought, I like it. That's interesting, and because that was before I started reading it. So
Right.
how it played out. But it is, and I'm certainly not going to say any more about the whole thing, except to say that I love the way you wrapped up that tension between the brothers. I thought that you did a very good job.
As
with that.
I was going along, I thought, how am I going to fix this?
Yeah, yeah. Because you
And,
hate to leave it.
I think you can't. I mean, I felt like I couldn't. It just, not only would it be an unsatisfying read, but it would sort of, the arc would be sort of pointless if they didn't resolve that.
Yeah, it would kind of sell both of them short.
I think it would. Yeah, it just would be unsatisfactory.
Well, you know what? And one of the things that was kind of really charming was how Owen really did develop that relationship with his niece and his nephew, and really just kind of was able to relate to them in a way that neither one of their parents could, but really kind of got into them and got the
Yeah.
kernel of who they were.
So there's a saying that if you borrow from one, it's plagiarism. If you borrow from a lot, it's research. Well, I borrowed a lot. And you know where that idea came from? The Robert Redford movie, The Natural. Do you remember that? He's a baseball player. There's a character in there for 30 seconds. He's a little boy, and he's the bat boy. And at some point in the crucial game, Robert Redford says, pick me out a winner, Bobby. And even now that makes me emotional.
Yeah.
And I thought, to have a kid be a foil, to have the kid there to, I think, I was going to say bounce ideas off, and it's not even that. I think sometimes when we talk, we work it out ourselves, but you need to talk. And who's he going to talk to? Well, he talks to the hunting trip when they go pheasant hunting. That's his opportunity to talk this out. So, and to think and talk, because a lot of it is internal dialogue. But that's why the kids are so prominent.
And then Jack's project.
Yes.
The whole project that he's
Yeah.
really, I mean, I know this. I really related to that because I remember being a kid myself. It's like, okay, do some art project that, somehow this, I was like, oh, are you kidding me?
Right.
I can't do an art project. What? But the way he kind of helped him through, worked him through that. And then as it turned out, it was successful.
That was successful, and then Owen's own art project, and that's something that I had in mind. And I think, again, I'm not sure what sequence these ideas came in, but at some point, Iris seemed to be the perfect way to resolve this, or Iris was the way. Yeah. So, and the other thing is, I get a kick out of language, and I got to put sayings in his mouth that are just fun sayings. Strange as suspenders on a snake.
Yeah, right.
I think it's in this book. He says, You only need one sip to know what the whole pitcher tastes like.
Right.
You know, just and that sort of thing.
Those old country
Yeah.
sayings that people
yeah.
like, yeah, right.
Yeah. At one point, he says he'd need instructions with gloves. So it was just a lot of fun to write.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Are those things that people in your families have said?
You know, not so much. I kind of picked it up like the all hat, just keeping my ears open. And we have a colorful language, and I just really like it. So.
You know, it's funny because I think I'm kind of like you. When people say things like a saying that, you know, there's something about that just sticks in my ear, and like it's hard to ever forget something unusual like that.
Well, I worked with a guy one time who something happened, and he said, "Well, that's the icing on the camel's back." So, okay.
And so you put that in the book.
Is that a malapropism? I'm not sure.
I'm sure that
Yeah.
something like that, right?
Yeah, but it's
The
just
straw that broke the camel's back, and
and the icing on the cake, and he
And he-
confused these two.
The icing on the camel's back.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was great. We're about out of time, but
Okay.
thank you so much.
Well, this has been wonderful, and I am.
And welcome home.
Wait a second.
Yeah.
I'm the biggest fan of your new book, so I want the first copy.
Oh, you
Hot off
got
the
it.
Press.
You got it. Thank you, my dear.
Thank you.
All right. Folks, that was it. If you want to learn more, you can go to my website. I am going to do a Kickstarter campaign, and if I know you, you'll probably be getting an email about that. And we'll just see you next time on The Writing Life. Thanks. And thank you.
What do you think? We done?
I don't know, you guys wanna do one
Yeah,
just
I
with
think
yourself
as
without
long
me
as
doing
they
the
think we're
bonus?
done, if
No,
they got
no.
enough, they got enough.
They got enough? Probably, okay, sounds good.
Let's go lunch. I'm
Oh.
hungry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could just bite too.